going on, guys? It's Heath Legend here. I knew that the topic of critical race theory would come up eventually, but following on from Donald Trump signing off on the fact that he no longer wants critical race theory to be taught in universities and in workplaces, I did think it was very interesting and something that we really should look at in relative amount of depth, because I've got my own thoughts on critical race theory. I was actually taught it back at university roughly 7 years ago or so. So yeah, let's get to it. So critical race theory is agreed that it was conceptualized in the 1980s, and it was as a response to students of color that were at Harvard. They believed that racial diversity was far underrepresented in the Harvard curriculum, and it effectively brings the whole of society into a racial lens, into a racial scope, where there are systems and powers put into place for the benefit of white people. White people use those systems and structures and institutional forms of racism in order to maintain power, whilst also holding down non-white people. And as I said, for the benefit of white people. And critical race theory basically holds that through the use of corporations, education systems, and codified laws, as well as the Constitution, that white people benefit from these more so than non-whites. And it also affirms that an individual themselves need not be racist, merely that racism exists at an institutional level and through dominant culture such as pop culture and other forms of dominant social behaviour and power structures. So effectively what critical race theory says is, through laws created by them, white people are dominant only through the fact that they are white and others can't come up. So really, when you look at that and you think about it colloquially, you can see that that effectively is a postmodern my game, my rules, home field advantage, whatever you want to call it. CRT basically says that white people will always be superior over non-white people due to the rules that they've designed and due to the rules that hold them as strong. Critical race theory has become something that people have been talking about quite often. I noticed that Sargon of Akkad spoke about this the other day on his channel, but it is something that I've always been really, really passionate about, because when I was sitting at university roughly 7 years ago or so, I always thought it was a load of bull. Bearing in mind, if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I'm a mixed race person. I've grown up mostly on the black side of my family, and a lot of pretty much everything that critical race theory throws up, I've disagreed with from the time I ever heard about it. One of the main criticisms that I've always had of CRT is when you look at it from its initial conception, it's purely anecdotal. The whole concept of CRT, it's become almost an absolute science. But if you bear with me here, it's not an absolute science. It's a hypothesis that people invested within that hypothesis will treat as though they must prove it to be true. And therefore, it's totally anecdotal. For instance, even though back in Harvard, they probably did have a lack of racial diversity there, that's not to say that the whole system was designed in order to propagate white supremacy. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but CRT looks at it from the scope of it was designed to propagate white supremacy. Realistically, when you look at any form of data that could or could not be drawn from studies that seek to prove CRT exists, any amount of infallible empirical data that could be gained from such a study, it would have to be verifiably true from both the victim and the perpetrator. So the victim would have to say it was done as a result of racism, but then the perpetrator would have to come out and admit their own guilt and say, yes, this was due to racism. And the only way you could gain data from that is if both sides, they gave their account without any embellishment, overplaying or underplaying of factors, which would be near impossible outside of a highly controlled environment. Nobody is going to go into an environment, if somebody isn't outright racist, because it's so bad to be called a racist these days, whether it's as an individual or a corporation or an institution, no one's going to go into a situation where they know they're going to be called that and then outright say that they are. There's absolutely no way you can gain pure empirical data when you're trying to gain an insight into whether CRT is right or not. And that's probably one of the biggest criticisms I've got of it, and which I've always had of it. Secondly, the notion of critical race theory, when you look at its initial conception, it creates, quote unquote, a lesser other, in this case, non-whites, that non-whites are so powerless and so useless to help themselves. Think of that word, useless. Remember that. They're so useless in helping themselves that only through the assistance of bleeding heart do-gooder white liberals are they able to be saved from themselves and saved from a racist system. Because whether critical race theory is accurate or not, the concept of the lesser other needing the white people of a system to assist them is out and out racism. If you look at the classical definition of racism, which I'll pop up on the screen here, you'll see that it is when one race categorizes itself as superior to another. Now, if critical race theory is accurate, the only way for non-whites to succeed would be through the help of do-gooder white people to assist them in changing the structure in order for them to succeed. And therefore, by definition, it means that those do-gooders are racist. Because without them and their superior know-how and their superior advantages gained to them through the system, the non-white could succeed. But the problem with that is, critical race theory, it provides absolutely no defense of its position in relation to Asian success. So, for instance, some of the most wealthy earners in America, for instance, are from India and from China. It provides absolutely no defense of its position. Those people are non-white, yet they come over to the UK and the US and they outperform the indigenous population. You just have to look at the statistics for that. But it also, then you can say, well, okay, maybe critical race theory only affects black people, perhaps, Mexicans and Latino people. African immigrants, they're more successful than African Americans in the US, for instance, and in the UK to the Caribbean population. Critical race theory provides no defense for its position on that point.
That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling.
Critical race theory, it fails to provide an answer as to why any power struggles exist within non-white nations. In terms of in Western countries, critical race theory, and you have to remember this, critical race theory provides the explanation that racism is the reason why certain power struggles happen in white countries. Remember that. It seeks to view everything through a racial lens and deconstruct everything in such a way that race has a role to play in every power struggle, in every system that's in place within Western nations. But those exact same power struggles, they occur in other nations, in African countries. They happen all the time. In terms of the corruption in African countries, the distribution of wealth in terms of between the wealthy elite and the poor, these phenomena happen in those countries too. And in those countries, it can never be about race, because in African nations, I would imagine that African nations are, apart from South Africa, 99.9% black. So those exact same power struggles happen in those countries. It can't be down to race, can it? It must be down to class and mostly wealth. The thing is, if we look at it through a class lens, which is more, I would say, more applicable, when you look at modern life and you look at contemporary life and you look at normal life, absolutely nobody wants the other to ruin the apple cart. Doesn't matter what walk of life you're from. Nobody wants an other to ruin a good thing. Now, I'll give you an example. If you look at any sort of homogenous group, I'm going to use a really, really basic example. Look at a group of friends in elementary school, primary school in the UK. New kid starts and the teacher puts the new kid on the table with the friends. Immediately, once that homogenous group feels slighted and there's going to be a slight difference in their dynamic, they'll basically change their behaviour as a result, and they'll seek to gain control as the group. if you think back to elementary school and primary school, you'll know that straight away. If the new kid started and you tried to be part of your friendship group, initially, at the very least, you'd probably haze them or you'd probably make a joke at their expense. And I'm just talking about from me, I'm talking about from everybody. I saw it happen all the time. There's quite a lot of new kids that started in my school and you'd see it all the time. But you'll notice that I didn't mention race. That kid, the new kid, could think of any particular reason as to why he's not being welcomed straight away. Literally everybody has been in this situation at least one point in their lives, whether it be at work, whether it be at school, college, university, within a sports team, even in your own family. Yet you'll notice I haven't given any details as a result to race or wealth. Anyone can acknowledge that it's identifiable that subconsciously a homogenized group can and will do what they can to assert power over the others. The problem is, critical race theory, it seeks to explain it all away by claiming that it's race. And I'm going to be honest with you, dude, the wealthy elites don't want to be surrounded by a riffraff. Look at the heroes of race baiting at the moment. LeBron James, Colin Kaepernick, Jussie Smollette. Do they live in the hood? Hell no, they don't live in the hood. You think LeBron James wants to live in the hood? I doubt it. They don't care about you. They're just ballers and actors. Even they don't want to live around by people like me and you because they think that we're beneath them. Yet race can't be used as a reason why LeBron James doesn't want to live in the hood. Why is that? Critical race theory provides no answer. Now it's interesting because Peter Wood, who is the president of the National Association of Scholars, he considers critical race theory as a grievance ideology, and I'll be honest with you, I can't really disagree with him on that one, especially now when you've got groups like BLM and other groups that can profit from race baiting. There's a financial incentive there in order to race bait and to grievance monger, you know, from large scale authors such as Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, to the individual non-white person who can gain financially through diversity hiring and box ticking, or even if it's just to gain fame and sympathy and crowdfunding from stuff such as fake race hate crimes that have been going on quite a lot, such as the girl who apparently lied about getting a haircut by racist white boys in school. My issue with critical race theory, and the same issue that a lot of criticisms that get labelled towards it, is that it genuinely does view everything through a racial lens, and it's done so in almost a fetishized degree now. It's almost a way for pseudo-intellectuals to deconstruct everything in a postmodern fashion, almost to the point where it's self-aggrandizing. And if I put that in simple terms, critical race theory has almost become a caricature of itself, where everything and everything has a racist origin and it's basically used as a vehicle for big-brained people. And I do use the term big-brained very loosely.
Big brain. Very large heads.
To show off their 300 IQ plays whilst profiting off race baiting and preying on the ignorance of do-gooder policymakers afraid to be called racist. And that's pretty much how I feel about it. Over here in the UK now, you've got a company called Sainsbury's that owns another company called Argos. And both of them, they're retail companies. And they're now saying that in support of black people, they're going to look at their pay gaps and provide safe spaces for black people in honour of Black History Month. It's like, so one, are you acknowledging that you've been paying black people less? And two, you're also pro-segregation. It's hilarious in a way. It's just absolutely hilarious how meta it's become, how self-aware it's become. But the people that are being played by it are not aware at all. They're not even aware of their own selves, never mind of what's happening to them. So now that I've labelled a few criticisms at it, what do I think? I'm just some guy on YouTube. And I think it's toxic as man. It has been some time since I studied critical race theory at university. It's been roughly 7 years or so, and I've always thought it was a load of bull, quite honestly. The reason I think that is because it definitely creates a toxic atmosphere amongst races. As a mixed race person who's grown up in a black family, I keep saying this, but it makes my argument hold a bit of water. I do know for a categorical, undeniable fact that black parents do often tell their children that they will be discriminated against because of race. Listen to this. Because of race, they tell their children they will be discriminated against or disliked because of their skin colour, because of the race. And I'll provide an example of one of Oprah Winfrey's shows where they were talking about the talk, quote unquote, of black parents to their children. I'll put that on the screen right now.
We have to be the first ones to introduce these conversations, because someone can come along and contaminate what you think or how you feel about other races because they introduce it to your children first. And so it was more trying to prepare them. And I'm even emotional watching it because I'm like, you can see it. You can watch the innocence leave. And it's a ushering out of joy that, you know, you hate to do it. It pains you, but it's kind of like, I need you to know how to survive.
So when you think of the amount of black parents that will tell their children that they will be disliked and will be held back as a result of their skin colour, when they're told that as an undeniable fact, what do you think that fosters within the mind of a small child? Their own parents are creating a potentially false narrative, and they create an image of other within the child. How do you think that affects an individual if such concepts are introduced to a small child between the age of 6 and 10? You know, kids who are still developing their own ego and concept of self. How damaging do you think that will be when they mature? They've been told by their own parents, who they love and trust, that they're going to be held back as a result of their skin colour. When they're being told that at such a critical moment in their life, how is that going to manifest itself within them when they become an adult with their own power? How will that affect them? I genuinely believe that that sort of parenting creates an individual who will attribute any criticism labelled at them or hardships that they face within life as down to race and only race, because it's the only thing they've been taught. Critical race theory and concepts such as the talk, it creates no framework for self-reflection whatsoever. You know, maybe those white people don't want to talk to them because they're loud and obnoxious and have an aggressive tone, or perhaps they didn't get a job because even though they're a black male, the company that they went to interview for, they were severely underrepresented by females. They had a large balance of males in relation to females, and perhaps the white female got the role because she was a female, not because the other candidate was a black male. Such questions are very, very hard for the victims of the race first excuse, which is what I like to call it, to ask themselves. Maybe it's me, maybe it's not the world thinking I'm this because I'm this, but maybe it's me, maybe I'm not as great a person as I think I am. Because anecdotally, from my perspective, yeah, I've never disliked someone as a result of their race, but I have disliked black people who are obnoxious and who are rude. Maybe I just don't like them because I don't get on with them. But I can say the same thing about white people, or in terms of myself, mixed race people. There's people in my own family who are the same ethnicity as me, same mixture as me, and I don't like them. But the difference is, race then can't be brought as an excuse, can it? No, it can't. This definitely creates perpetual victims with emotional incontinence. You can see that happening now with the BLM protests and them squealing and squealing and screeching and squawking. Some unintelligible nonsense sometimes. They're just making noise. The problem stems from the fact that the world is so afraid to be called racist. It's seemingly worse now to be called a racist than a nonce. And no one can tell me that's different either. And race baiters, they do have a sense of entitlement, and it's being created in them. This entitlement of being racially wronged, and hence people that have wronged them, whether actively or passively, they must take a knee and raise a fist to apologise to them and acknowledge that they have white privilege and revoke it. You gotta remember, the race agitators are learning as much about white guilt in universities as they are critical race theory. and the concept of whiteness. When you look at that framework, they know how to play the system. They know how to use white guilt as a way to get ahead, as a way to get away with things that others can't, as a way to play the system. It's not about justice anymore. It's about cutting a check.
Now, if you want to talk to me about reparations, nothing falls short of a solution other than people cutting a check. If you want to do something about reparations, cut the check.
So what do I think? Critical race theory is toxic as f. If you like what you heard, please do like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. Ring the bell. Until next time, Heath Legend out.